Ma'am, where'd you get all this cash?
I'm a businesswoman. It's mine.
There's no way. She had to have stolen it. Someone like her.
All right, that's enough. Ma'am, you're under arrest. Turn around.
What? You can't be
Yes, I'm serious. Yes, I'm serious. Hands back behind you.
Arrest.
Jessica Hartman, a 26-year-old bank teller at Dominion Federal Bank in Charlotte, with 4 years of experience and a history of questioning minority customers that her supervisors had documented and ignored, saw Adrienne Moss, a black woman, walk up to her counter in casual clothes and immediately began watching her with suspicion before a single word was spoken. When Adrienne placed $20,000 in bundled 20s on the counter and said she wanted to make a deposit, Jessica didn't process the transaction. She interrogated Adrienne about where the money came from, told her, "People like you don't normally make deposits like this," demanded identification, and then left the counter to call the police and report suspected fraud or drug money. And when Officer Dennis Cole arrived, he treated Adrienne like a criminal, shouted at her, threatened arrest, ignored her explanations, and when she finally identified herself as the CEO of the bank, both Jessica and Cole dismissed it as a lie, and Cole handcuffed her in the middle of the lobby. What neither of them knew, what they were about to learn in the most humiliating way possible, was that Adrienne Moss wasn't lying, and that their racist assumptions had just destroyed both of their careers and will cost the city over $1 million. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. And if you believe no one should be treated like a criminal for making a lawful bank deposit just because of their race, like this video and subscribe. Adrienne Moss had been awake since 5 a.m. She flew into Charlotte from New York that morning for a quarterly business review at the regional office. The kind of routine visit she made 4 times a year to check in on branch performance, meet with district managers, and review expansion plans. Her assistant Maya had packed the day with back-to-back meetings starting at 11 a.m., but Adrienne had one personal errand she wanted to handle first. She had $20,000 in cash sitting in her leather bag. It was earmarked for a property investment closing later that week, and rather than carry it through 2 more meetings and a flight back to New York, she decided to deposit it that morning. She texted Maya, "Branching into the Charlotte location for a quick deposit. Meet you at the office after." It was supposed to take 5 minutes. Adrienne Moss was 47 years old and had spent 22 years working her way up through Dominion Federal Bank. She started as a branch manager in Brooklyn, moved to regional director in Philadelphia, then executive vice president in Boston, and 6 years ago she was named general CEO of the entire institution. She oversaw 340 branches across 12 states. The Charlotte branch she was about to walk into? She had personally approved its construction budget 3 years earlier. But that morning, she wasn't dressed like a CEO. She was dressed like a woman who had a 6 a.m. flight and valued comfort over performance when she wasn't on stage. Dark jeans, black blazer, white sneakers, leather bag over her shoulder, reading glasses tucked into her pocket. No jewelry except the watch her father gave her when she made VP. She walked into the Dominion Federal Bank branch on West Trade Street at 9:47 a.m., joined the line behind 4 other customers, and waited her turn like everyone else. The lobby was busy. Morning rush. People depositing checks, withdrawing cash, opening accounts. The tellers behind the counter moved through transactions with practiced efficiency. Adrienne watched them work and made mental notes. Customer wait time looked reasonable. Signage could be clearer. One of the deposit slip dispensers was empty. When her turn came, she stepped up to the counter where a young woman sat behind the glass partition. Blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail, sharp features, name tag that read Jessica Hartman. She had been working at this branch for 4 years, and in those 4 years she had developed very specific ideas about what kind of customers made large deposits and what kind of customers were up to something they shouldn't be. Her supervisors had documented complaints from minority customers. 4 over the years, all claiming Jessica had treated them differently, questioned them more aggressively, made assumptions based on appearance. The complaints had been filed, noted, and ignored. Jessica looked up as Adrienne approached, and the moment she registered who was standing in front of her, a black woman in jeans and sneakers. Something in her expression changed. Her eyes moved from Adrienne's face to her clothes to the worn leather bag over her shoulder, and the professional courtesy that had been there a second ago cooled into something else entirely. "Good morning," Adrienne said with a smile. "I'd like to make a deposit." Jessica's response was flat. "Account card?" Adrienne placed it on the counter. Jessica picked it up, glanced at it without really reading it, and set it aside. "What are you depositing today?" Adrienne opened her bag and pulled out a bundle of cash. $20,000 in bundled 20s, neatly wrapped and counted. She placed it on the counter between them. Jessica stared at the money. Her eyes lingered on it for a long moment before moving back to Adrian's face. "That's a lot of cash." "It is," Adrian said evenly. "Where did you get it?" The question landed wrong. Adrian had made hundreds of deposits over the years in dozens of branches across the country, and no teller had ever opened with that. She kept her tone calm. "I'm depositing it into my account. That's all you need to process the transaction." Jessica leaned back in her chair, arms crossing over her chest. "People like you don't normally make deposits like this. Not dressed like that." There it was. Adrian felt the words settle in the air between them, and she understood immediately what Jessica meant by people like you. She had heard variations of it her entire life. In boardrooms, in interviews, in spaces where people looked at her and decided she didn't belong before she opened her mouth. But she stayed calm. "I'd like to make my deposit. Can you process it, please?" "I need to verify your identity first." "You have my account card." "I need to see your ID." Adrian glanced to her left, the customer who had been in line ahead of her. A white man in his 50s wearing a polo shirt had deposited what looked like a similar amount of cash just 3 minutes earlier. Jessica hadn't asked him for identification. She hadn't questioned where his money came from. She had processed his transaction in under 2 minutes and smiled as he walked away. Adrian turned back to Jessica. "You didn't ask the customer before me for ID." Jessica's jaw tightened. "That's protocol. I need to verify, or I can't proceed." Adrian pulled her driver's license from her wallet and placed it on the counter without another word. Jessica picked it up and examined it closely. Her eyes narrowed as she read the name, Adrian Moss. She didn't recognize it. She didn't recognize the face, and Jessica Hartman had worked at this branch for 4 years. Long enough, in her mind, to know every high-value customer who walked through that door. Long enough to believe she could tell the difference between someone who belonged and someone who didn't. She looked at Adrian again. Casual clothes, $20,000 in cash, a name she didn't know. Jessica made a decision. "I need to verify this further before I can proceed. Give me a moment." She stood up, taking Adrian's ID and account card with her, and walked away from the counter toward the back office. Adrian stood at the counter and waited. The bundle of cash still sat between them, untouched. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. Other customers in line glanced over, sensing something was off. The teller at the next station looked uncomfortable but kept her head down and said nothing. At the 7-minute mark, Adrian pulled out her phone and checked the time. 9:54 a.m. She had a meeting at 11. This was taking longer than it should. In the back office, Jessica Hartman was on her phone, speaking in a low, urgent voice to a 911 dispatcher. "There's a black woman at Dominion Federal Bank on West Trade trying to deposit what I believe is stolen or drug money. She has $20,000 in cash and her story doesn't add up. You need to send someone now." She gave the address, hung up, and stayed in the back office. Adrian stood at the counter for another 3 minutes. Then she saw the police cruiser pull up outside. Officer Dennis Cole stepped out of the vehicle, adjusted his belt, and walked through the front door with the posture of a man who had already decided what kind of situation he was walking into. He was in his mid-30s, 9 years on the force, and he had responded to calls like this before. Calls about suspicious activity, about people who didn't look like they belonged, about cash that didn't add up. He scanned the lobby, and his eyes landed on Adrian, the only black woman standing at the counter. He walked directly toward her. Jessica emerged from the back office at the same moment. When she saw Cole, she pointed at Adrian and said loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear, "That's her, the one trying to deposit illegal money." Every customer in the building turned to look. Adrian stood perfectly still. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just looked at Jessica, then at Officer Cole, and then understood with perfect clarity that this was about to get much worse before it got better. Cole stopped directly in front of her, hands resting on his belt. "Ma'am, where did you get this cash?" Adrian opened her mouth to answer. Cole cut her off before she could speak, his voice sharp and loud enough to carry across the lobby. "Think carefully how you answer that question, ma'am. I'm sick of your kind always committing crimes." Adrian stood at the counter with 30 people watching her, and a police officer who had just told her he was sick of her kind, demanding an explanation for cash that belonged to her. She took a breath, kept her voice steady, and said exactly what was true. "The money is mine. I work for it. I'm here to deposit it into my account. I don't understand what's going on here." Officer Dennis Cole's expression didn't change. He looked at her the way someone looks at a lie they've heard 100 times before. What's going on here is that people like you don't just walk around with $20,000 in cash unless it's stolen or fraud. You either prove how you got this money right now, or you're getting arrested. Jessica stepped closer to the counter, arms still crossed, nodding in agreement. I know all our customers. I've worked here for 4 years. I know what they look like and how they dress. She gestured at Adrian's jeans and sneakers with open disdain. Someone dressed like her can't possibly be walking around with that much cash unless it's stolen or drug money. Adrian felt the room closing in, but she didn't raise her voice. She looked directly at Cole and said what she had been thinking since the moment he walked through the door. Is this because I'm black? Cole's face hardened immediately. There it is. You people always play the race card the second you get caught. Your kind disgust me. He held out his hand. ID, now. Adrian had already given her driver's license to Jessica, but Jessica was holding it like evidence rather than documentation. Cole snatched it from Jessica's hand and examined it with the same skepticism Jessica had shown. He read the name. Adrian Moss. And it meant nothing to him. He looked at the address, looked at Adrian, and his expression said he had already made up his mind about what kind of person she was. What do you do for work? I'm a businesswoman. Cole let out a short, sarcastic laugh. Yeah, that's right, a businesswoman. He turned to Jessica. Did she say what kind of business? Jessica shook her head. She's been vague about everything since she walked in. Adrian spoke up, her voice firm, but not loud. I haven't been vague about anything. I came here to make a deposit. That's all I've tried to do. Cole ignored her completely. He pulled out his radio and spoke into it while staring directly at Adrian. Running an ID check. Stand by. Then he looked back at her, his hand resting on his belt near his cuffs. Don't move from that spot. You understand me? Adrian nodded once, and in that moment. While Cole was waiting for the ID check to come back, while Jessica stood behind the counter looking satisfied, while every customer in the lobby watched this scene unfold, Adrian pulled her phone out of her pocket and typed quickly. Being detained at Charlotte branch. Police called on me, accused of depositing illegal money. Come now, full security. She hit send and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Cole's radio crackled. The voice on the other end confirmed what Adrian already knew. ID is clean. No warrants, no priors, nothing. Cole looked at the radio like it had given him the wrong information. He looked back at Adrian, and instead of apologizing or reconsidering, he doubled down. You're being detained for further verification. We're going to the station to sort this out. Adrian's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. You're arresting me? For what? For suspected fraud and failure to provide adequate explanation for the source of funds. I told you the money is mine, my ID is clean, you have no probable cause. Cole stepped closer. I have plenty of cause, now turn around. Adrian didn't move. I'm not going anywhere. I need to tell you something and you need to listen. Cole's hand moved to his cuffs. Turn around. Last warning. Adrian spoke quickly, clearly, looking directly into his eyes. My name is Adrian Moss. I am the General CEO of Dominion Federal Bank. This bank, the one you're standing in right now. I flew in from New York this morning to make a deposit in my own institution. She reached into her bag and pulled out her official CEO identification card. The one with her photo, her title, and the Dominion Federal Bank logo stamped across the top. She held it up for both Cole and Jessica to see. Jessica looked at the card, looked at Adrian, and then she laughed. It was loud and sharp and dismissive. The CEO is in New York, and she would never be someone dressed like you. That's a lie. Cole looked at the ID card, chuckled, and shook his head. No surprise. People like you will say anything to avoid getting arrested. You think I'm stupid? Adrian tried to speak again, tried to explain, but Cole was done listening. He grabbed her arm, turned her around, and pulled her hands behind her back. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, and Adrian felt the weight of them. Not just the physical weight, but the weight of what this moment meant. She was standing in her own bank, in a building she had approved funding for, in a lobby where her executive portrait hung on the wall in the back hallway, and she was being arrested because a teller and a police officer couldn't process the idea that a black woman in casual clothes could be the person in charge. Cole's voice was in her ear now, low and satisfied. You're under arrest for suspected fraud and obstruction. You have the right to remain silent. Adrian didn't stay silent. Her voice carried across the entire lobby. I am the CEO of this bank. My assistant is on her way. You are making the biggest mistake of your career. Jessica walked out from behind the counter, moving toward the pile of cash still sitting on the countertop. Cole gestured to her. "Bag that money. We'll need it as evidence." Jessica pulled out a large plastic evidence bag and started placing the bundled bills inside, handling them like they were contraband instead of legitimate funds from a legitimate account holder. Adrian watched her do it, watched Cole stand beside her with one hand on Adrian's arm, and understood that neither of them believed a single word she had said. A customer near the door, a middle-aged woman who had been watching the entire interaction, pulled out her phone and started recording. Another customer, a man in a business suit, spoke up. "Officer, I think you should verify what she's saying before you take her out of here." Cole turned on him immediately. "Sir, step back. This doesn't concern you." The man held his ground. "I'm just saying she's been calm this whole time. She's cooperating. Maybe you should check." "Step back, now." The man stepped back, but he didn't put his phone away. Cole turned Adrian toward the door, his grip firm on her arm. Jessica had finished bagging the money and was holding it like a trophy. Adrian looked around the lobby one more time. At the customers watching, at the tellers behind the counter who looked uncomfortable but said nothing, at Jessica who looked vindicated, at Cole who looked like he had just closed a case. And then she heard it. The sound of car doors slamming outside, multiple car doors, all at once. Cole heard it too. He paused, still holding Adrian's arm, and turned toward the front entrance. 3 black SUVs had pulled up directly in front of the bank, parked at sharp angles like they had arrived in a hurry. The doors opened simultaneously, and 6 men in black suits stepped out. They moved with precision and purpose, and leading them. Walking fast, tablet in hand, expression locked in fury, was Maya Chen. She pushed through the front doors of the bank, and her eyes found Adrian immediately, handcuffed, standing beside a police officer, in the middle of the lobby. Maya's voice cut through the entire building like a blade. "Release that woman right now!" Maya Chen didn't wait for a response. She crossed the lobby in 6 strides, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots, and the 6 men in black suits fanned out behind her in a formation that made it very clear they were not there to negotiate. She stopped 3 feet from Officer Dennis Cole, looked at Adrian, standing in handcuffs, and then turned her full attention to Cole with an expression that could have stripped paint off a wall. "Do you know who you just handcuffed?" Cole's grip on Adrian's arm tightened slightly, but his voice stayed steady. He had dealt with angry family members before, angry friends, angry lawyers, and he wasn't about to be intimidated by a woman with a tablet and a security team. "Ma'am, step back. This is an active arrest." Maya didn't step back. She stepped closer. "I asked you a question, officer. Do you know who this woman is?" "She's under arrest for suspected fraud and failure to provide—" "Her name is Adrian Moss." Maya's voice was loud enough now that every person in the lobby could hear every word. "She is the General CEO of Dominion Federal Bank. This bank, the one you are standing in, the one that employs every person behind that counter, the one whose logo is on your uniform because your department banks here." Cole's expression flickered for half a second, but he recovered quickly. "She claimed that. I don't believe her." Maya held up her tablet and turned it toward Cole's face. On the screen was Adrian's executive profile from the Dominion Federal Bank website, her photograph. The same face Cole was looking at right now. Her title, General CEO, Dominion Federal Bank. Her bio, listing 22 years with the company, 6 years as CEO, oversight of 340 branches across 12 states. Cole stared at the screen. His hand was still on Adrian's arm, but his fingers had loosened slightly. Maya turned the tablet towards Jessica, who was still standing behind the counter holding the bag of cash, like she had just solved the crime. "You called the police on her? Your CEO, the woman who runs this entire institution." Jessica's face had gone pale, but her mouth opened anyway, words tumbling out in a defensive rush. "I didn't know. She didn't say. She just walked in dressed like that and—" "She told you who she was." Maya's voice was cold and precise. "She showed you identification. She explained she was making a deposit, and you decided she was a criminal because of how she was dressed and the color of her skin." Jessica tried again. "I was just being thorough. I've worked here for 4 years and I know our customers." "You know your customers." Maya turned to one of the security personnel behind her and nodded. He stepped forward, pulled a folder from his briefcase, and handed it to Maya. She opened it without breaking eye contact with Jessica. "Let me tell you what I know about you, Jessica Hartman. You've been employed at this branch for 4 years. In those 4 years, there have been 4 formal complaints filed against you by minority customers. All 4 complaints cited the same behavior. Excessive questioning, demands for additional identification, accusations of fraudulent activity. All 4 complaints were documented by your supervisor and dismissed as misunderstandings. Jessica's face went from pale to white. Maya kept reading. 2 months ago, a black man tried to deposit $8,000 in cash. You questioned him for 15 minutes, demanded 3 forms of ID, and suggested he was involved in illegal activity. He filed a complaint. It was dismissed. 3 months before that, a Latina woman tried to cash a check for $12,000. You made her wait 30 minutes while you verified the check, even though it was drawn on an account at this bank. She filed a complaint. It was dismissed. Maya closed the folder and looked at Jessica like she was looking at something that had been rotting in the sun. You have a pattern, Jessica, and today you acted on it one more time. Except today the person you profiled wasn't just another customer. She was your boss. Jessica opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Cole finally spoke, and his voice had lost some of its certainty. She didn't properly identify herself. If she had just said from the beginning... Maya turned on him like a whip. She told you she was the CEO. You laughed in her face. She didn't have proof. She showed you her CEO identification card. You called it a lie. Cole's jaw tightened. He looked down at Adriana's ID card, which was still sitting on the counter where he had tossed it after deciding it was fake. Maya walked over, picked it up, and held it in front of his face. Official, Dominion Federal Bank, CEO credentials. Adrian's name. Adrian's face. The corporate seal embossed in gold. Does this look like a lie to you, Officer Cole? Cole said nothing. Maya gestured to the walls around them. Do you see that hallway behind the teller stations? The one that leads to the executive offices? She pointed. Walk down that hallway right now. 3rd door on the right. There is a portrait of every CEO this bank has ever had. Adrian Moss is the 7th. Her picture is hanging on that wall. It's been there for 6 years. Cole didn't move. One of the customers who had been recording the entire interaction spoke up from near the door. I'll go check. He walked toward the hallway, disappeared for 10 seconds and came back. She's right. There's a whole wall of portraits back there. Adrian Moss, General CEO. Her picture's hanging right next to the founder. The lobby was completely silent. Maya turned back to Cole. Uncuff her, right now. Cole hesitated. His hand was still on Adrian's arm, and the handcuffs were still locked around her wrists, and he was standing in the middle of a situation that had just flipped completely upside down. He looked at Jessica. Like maybe she would have something to say that would make this make sense again. Jessica looked at the floor. Cole reached for his keys and unlocked the handcuffs. Adrian brought her hands forward and rubbed her wrists where the metal had been. She didn't say anything yet. She just stood there, breathing slowly, while Cole stepped back and tried to figure out what to do with his hands. Maya wasn't done. She turned to Jessica. You called 911 and reported suspected fraud. You told the dispatcher that a black woman was trying to deposit stolen or drug money. You made that call without verifying a single fact. You made that call because you saw a black woman with cash and decided she was a criminal. Jessica's voice came out small and shaking. I was just trying to protect the bank. You were trying to protect the bank. Maya repeated the words slowly like she was tasting them, from its own CEO. Jessica had no answer for that. Adrian finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the entire lobby, and every person in that building heard every word. I walked into my own bank this morning to make a simple deposit. I waited in line like every other customer. I reached the counter and I was treated like a suspect from the first second. Not because I did anything wrong, not because my money was suspicious, not because I couldn't provide identification, but because you saw a black woman in casual clothes and decided I didn't belong here. She looked at Jessica. You questioned me. You demanded my ID. You left me standing at that counter for 10 minutes while you called the police and reported me for a crime I didn't commit. And when I told you who I was, you laughed. Then she looked at Cole. You walked in here already convinced I was guilty. You shouted at me. You threatened me. You told me you were sick of my kind. You ran my ID and it came back clean, and you still decided to arrest me. And when I told you I was the CEO of this bank, you called me a liar and put me in handcuffs. She held up her wrists, where the red marks from the cuffs were still visible. I have spent 22 years building a career in this industry. I have worked in branches like this one. I have processed deposits like the one I tried to make today. I have dealt with customers, with employees, with regulators, with boards, with investors. I have done everything right. And today I was arrested in my own building because 2 people looked at me and saw a criminal instead of a CEO. The silence in the lobby was absolute. Adrian turned to Jessica. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Jessica's eyes went wide. Wait, please, I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you did. You've been doing it for 4 years. It ends now. Two of the men in black suits moved toward Jessica. She looked around the lobby like someone might step in and save her, but no one moved. The other tellers behind the counter looked away. The branch manager, who had finally emerged from his office during the commotion, said nothing. Jessica was walked out of the building with her hands shaking and her face streaked with tears. Adrian turned to Cole. You'll be hearing from my attorney. I'm filing a federal civil rights lawsuit, and I will be pressing for your termination and for a full investigation into your conduct. Cole tried to speak. Ma'am, I was responding to a call. I didn't know. You didn't listen. There's a difference. Maya stepped forward and handed Adrienne her bag, her ID, and her CEO card. Adrienne took them, slung the bag over her shoulder, and looked around the lobby one last time. At the customers who had watched the whole thing. At the tellers who had stayed silent. At the counter where her $20,000 were still sitting in an evidence bag. She walked over, picked up the bag, opened it, and pulled the cash back out. She placed it on the counter in front of the branch manager, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Process the deposit. He nodded quickly, hands fumbling with the bills. Adrienne turned and walked toward the door. Maya and the security team fell in behind her, and as she stepped out into the morning sunlight, every person in that lobby knew exactly what they had just witnessed. The end of 2 careers. And the beginning of a reckoning. The video was everywhere by noon. 4 different customers had recorded the incident from 4 different angles, and by the time Adrienne's legal team sent out the official statement, the footage had already been viewed over 8 million times. By the end of the week, it had reached 40 million. Every major news outlet ran the story with the same headline variations. CEO handcuffed in her own bank. Black executive arrested for depositing cash. Racist teller calls police on boss. The image that spread the fastest was a freeze frame from one of the videos showing Adrienne standing in handcuffs in the middle of the Dominion Federal Bank lobby, while Jessica Hartman stood behind the counter holding the bag of money like evidence. Jessica Hartman was terminated within 6 hours of the incident. Dominion Federal Bank released a statement calling her actions a violation of company policy and federal anti-discrimination laws, and announced that she would not be eligible for rehire at any branch. But the termination was just the beginning. Adrienne's legal team, working with the district attorney's office, filed criminal charges against Jessica for filing a false police report. The case went to trial 4 months later, and the jury took less than 2 hours to return a guilty verdict. Jessica was sentenced to 6 months in county jail and 2 years of probation. She was also banned from working in the banking industry for life. At 26 years old, with a criminal record and her name permanently attached to one of the most widely shared videos of racial profiling in the country, Jessica Hartman's career was over before it had really begun. Officer Dennis Cole's consequences came just as swiftly. He was placed on administrative leave the same day as the incident, and the Charlotte Police Department launched an internal investigation that revealed a pattern of conduct they could no longer ignore. Over his 9 years on the force, Cole had been the subject of 8 formal complaints related to racially biased policing. All 8 complaints had been investigated and cleared, but when viewed together as a pattern rather than isolated incidents, the picture was unmistakable. Cole had a history of treating Black and Latino residents with suspicion, aggression, and disrespect. His Bodycam footage from the bank showed him telling Adrienne he was sick of her kind, and that statement alone was enough to violate multiple department policies. He was terminated 3 weeks after the incident. His appeal was denied. At 35 years old, with no other law enforcement agency willing to hire him and his name tied to a viral video, Dennis Cole's career in policing was finished. Adrienne filed the federal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Cole and the city of Charlotte 2 weeks after the incident. The lawsuit sought $1.1 million in damages and demanded systemic reforms to prevent similar incidents from happening again. The charges included unlawful detention, false arrest, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, and racial discrimination. The city's legal team reviewed the evidence. Multiple videos, witness statements, body cam footage, Cole's history of complaints, and Jessica's documented pattern of discriminatory behavior, and made the decision to settle rather than go to trial. They knew no jury would side with them. The settlement was finalized for the full $1.1 million within 4 months, and it came with a list of mandatory reforms that Adrienne had demanded. The Charlotte Police Department implemented new training protocols on implicit bias, created an independent review board for discrimination complaints, and established a requirement that all officers must verify claims before making arrests in cases involving suspected fraud or financial crimes. Dominion Federal Bank didn't escape scrutiny either. Adrian used the incident as a catalyst for company-wide reform. She mandated bias training for all employees at every branch, implemented a new system for handling customer complaints that included third-party oversight, and established quarterly audits of customer interactions broken down by race to identify patterns of discriminatory behavior before they escalated. 3 other employees with complaint histories similar to Jessica's were quietly let go. The bank also issued a public apology and committed $5 million to a fund supporting victims of financial discrimination. 5 years later, Adrienne Moss is still the general CEO of Dominion Federal Bank. She speaks regularly at conferences about implicit bias in the financial industry and has become one of the most vocal advocates for racial equity in banking. Jessica Hartman is working in retail for minimum wage, her criminal record and viral infamy making it nearly impossible to find stable employment. Officer Dennis Cole has not worked in law enforcement since his termination and has largely disappeared from public view. The Charlotte branch of Dominion Federal Bank now has a large portrait of Adrienne Moss hanging in the main lobby where every customer and employee can see it. Beneath the portrait is a plaque that reads, "Leadership is earned through service, and respect is owed to every person who walks through our doors." The lesson was expensive, public, and permanent. A black woman should never have to prove she belongs in a space she built. Assumptions based on race cost careers, cost freedom, and cost over $1 million. And sometimes the only way a system learns is when the cost becomes too high to ignore. If you believe a CEO should be able to make a deposit in her own bank without being treated like a criminal, share this story. Drop in the comments what changes you think every bank should make to prevent racial profiling. And if this story reminded you that dignity doesn't depend on a title, it depends on humanity. Subscribe, because we're going to keep telling these stories until assumptions stop destroying lives. Asterisk.